Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement in the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I manage the Alumni Careers and Lifelong Learning program here at UB. I am also joined by my wonderful colleague Joy Rona, who will assist in monitoring any questions. We are both so grateful you are able to join us today, and we hope you and your family are staying well. It is my honor to welcome today's featured presenter, Dianna Cichocki, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Management Science and Systems Department at the University at Buffalo. Dianna teaches Statistical Decisions in Management in the School of Management's undergraduate program, Statistical Foundations and Analytics in the Professional MBA program, and Model Managerial Process, Data Modeling in the Executive MBA program. In addition to teaching, she has offered workshops, presentations at the local, state, and national levels concerning effective use of Microsoft Excel and best practices in data visualization. In this webinar, Dianna will provide an overview for how to bridge the gap by turning basic charts into a compelling story. Being able to analyze data and tell stories with the results is key to transforming data into information that can be used to drive better decision making. We are going to leave some time during today's presentation for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the GoToWebinar taskbar. There's a question section right there on your screen, and you can chat those to us at any time. We will save those, and I will facilitate the Q&A with Dianna at the end of her presentation. And then in addition, we will be recording today's session, and we will send you all a copy within the next 24 hours. So with that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our featured presenter, Dianna Cichocki.
Thank you very much, Christy. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am thrilled to join you on this Wednesday afternoon as it is currently. Currently outside for me right now, it's kind of gloomy, but hopefully for you, maybe it's not, and that this will brighten your day a little bit. So talking about data visualizations. As Christy said, great skill to have is to be able to actually transform your data into a story. There are many, as you know, in your industry, there are many charts and visualizations that are produced, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily, monthly, whatever that may be, that really don't give any information other than confusion when it comes to looking at the chart. And really what you should be able to do when you have a visualization is to quickly, within 15 to 30 seconds, you should be able to make business decisions based on your visualizations. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have an overview of beyond data dumps and storytelling with data. And I'm going to go ahead and mute my camera to get started with the presentation. All right, so the first part of the presentation is really a myth. So there's this myth that we visualize data because some people are visual learners. Now, you've probably heard that myth that what happens is, there's these people that are visual learners, that some people are visual learners, but, the quant people like myself like to think that, we're not visual learners, we're quantitative people. And honestly, that's not me. I don't say that because I know that I am a visual learner. And in fact, a couple facts here for you is the human brain does process visual information 60,000 times faster than text, and the visuals aid significantly in our retention of information. So being able to process and remember information is key with visuals. And then the idea that everyone does benefit from a data visualization. So there's different types of presentations. So there's basic text, right? So would you like to buy the world of Coke? Well, turns out people around the world have already poured themselves a glass. This is a statistic from a bit ago that 1.7 billion servings of Coca-Cola products are consumed worldwide every day. Well, that's great. It's a text. Anybody in marketing knows that, or communication knows, it's so much better when you pair that with a visual. So you have method B, which obviously is preferred, that you have the Coke colors, the famous, Coca-Cola red and white, and then you put the 1.7 in what appears to be a carbonated beverage. And then you have the daily number of servings worldwide, and you can tell a story rather than having the text. So like I say, in marketing and communications, we know that that's key. And the idea where people miss out is they forget that if you're just trying to convey one single value, there's really no need for, let's say, a bar graph or a line graph or the dreaded, what I'm going to call the dreaded pie chart, but rather you can just show the number that you're trying to convey. You can use text in your visuals. So numbers have an important story to tell, but you see what happens with numbers is they are going to rely on you to give them a clear and convincing voice. And I put this quote up here because for those of you in the webinar, I want you to know that if you want to dig deeper into this, obviously we have, an hour here that we're together, 45 minutes of a presentation and a little time for questions, but you might want to go further and dig a little deeper. And one of the ways to do that is to research this gentleman, Stephen Few. A guru in the field of data visualization, and I highly recommend you look into his work, and he has some great texts as well that will help you out. Another, Edward Tufte, is graphical excellence, is that which gives to the viewer the greatest number of ideas, and I spoke to this in the beginning, the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space. Now that speaks to the fact that with the least ink is talking about when you see those visuals where you may have a bar chart and the bar chart has, all of the data points on it. And then underneath you have a table along with the bar chart of all the data points. It's a common visual that we'll see in industry. And that's not the least ink by far. And you can't get the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time. So what I'm going to show you today are ways to capture that. So here's the idea though. When we talk about communicating data, honestly, it doesn't come naturally. In school, the way we're trained from our very early years of education is that we typically learn language and math. And even in our studies of history, we're studying history through our language, right? So we learn to put words together, and in our literature classes or English classes, we're putting words together, we're making stories, but we're doing that in the language side of things. It's not until very recently, actually, that in mathematics, they focus more on the written mathematics, on being able to verbally communicate what you're doing in math. And people of my generation and after have really struggled with that idea, right? That what's happening in our math classes these days are our children are being asked to write and think about and write down and verbalize what their thought processes are, right? Because that's not what we had to do. But actually that communicating that theory is great because what it does is it helps people learn how to make sense of numbers and number literacy, because we don't get taught how to communicate numbers. And what happens is when we get into wanting to analyze our data and make business decisions, we end up relying on tools because there's all these great tools out there. We have Excel, Microsoft Excel, which you'll hear me talk about more, or, we can use SPSS, there's R, there's Tableau, there's all these great tools. But the problem with the tools is the tools don't understand our best practices. You see, the tool is only as good as the user, right? So we have to know those best practices and how to communicate effectively so that we can use and leverage our tools. So I'm going to give you a third guru, and I am a huge fan of Cole Knaflic. I hope I'm not butchering her name. People butcher my name all the time. But Cole Knaflic is, she has a website, a blog, and you can subscribe to her blog, and she actually has a community of people that come together and critique visualizations and create visualizations, and it's a really robust community and site. So I do recommend you Google her. And she has said being able to visualize data and tell stories with it is key to turning it into information that can be used to drive better decision making. And if you just spend a little bit of time on her site, you'll see that she has all kinds of information. Like I said, I highly recommend you check her out. A lot of the information, even in this presentation, comes from her teaching. So along with coming from her teaching, there are 6 steps to telling your story. And in this presentation, I'm actually going to focus on just the very final step. And the reason for that is if I went through all 6 steps, this would be a training. It wouldn't be a webinar presentation that we could get through in 45 minutes or so. This would take longer than that. It would be more robust, and of course that is possible. I've done those types of presentations and trainings, but in the 6 steps, there are ways to get to the point where you can produce the story. So it's not like you just have this data and you jump to telling the story. There's training and learning that goes along the way. But we are going to jump right to telling your story. Oops, I'm sorry, I jumped a slide on you. So when you tell your story, that 6th step, what you do is you want to put your results together in a meaningful way. And you want the order of your story actually depends on how you want to go. So do you want to think of a plot, right? Think of writing a novel or writing a book or whatever it is that you're narrating is. Do you want to build to the ending, or do you want to lead with the ending? And there's some training that goes along with that about which you should do depending on your audience as well. But these are the things you have to think about: is who is your audience, and what is the purpose? Are you creating a flyer or a PDF, or are you actually in front of an audience, and are you actually presenting it? Well, if you're actually presenting it, you might want to build to the ending. You might want to show step by step your story. Whereas if you're emailing out a document, you're going to want to lead with the ending. You're going to want to give all your information all at once. You don't want to let the user come up with their own conclusions. You want to make sure you target those conclusions. So the idea is if people can easily recall, repeat, and transfer your message, then you've done a great job. So if people can remember what you've said and some of the statistics you've disseminated, then you've done well. And that's the idea even with the 1.7. So even if I bet you a week from now I said to you, what is 1.7 billion? And you might, very good likelihood that you'd be able to say, oh, that had to do with Coca-Cola products. Okay, so now here is a perfect example of something that we see very often in industry, where we have a before and after. So we don't see the before and after in industry, but if you look at the before visualization here, and I'm going to take a few minutes and just camp on this. What I do in my trainings when I'm talking about data visualization, or in my classes when I teach data visualization, is I like people to really focus on the before and after. And in the beginning, I'll even give them the after and have them just remake the visualization. But it's key to learning what the best practices are. It's the idea that if you don't know how you can improve, how are you going to improve, right? Like, we have to be taught, we have to be informed as to where the shortfalls are so that we can fix them. And that's the great, that's one of the biggest benefits, by the way, of Cole Knafleck and her blog and her community of storytelling with data, is that people are able to join one another and share ideas and critique one another. It's one of the best benefits of that. So when you look at this left-hand side graph, you can see in this visualization, okay, well, we can look at it for a little bit, and what you may be coming up with is, all right, it's something about marriage rates by education. And my eye, generally, by the way, what our eyes are going to do, because it's the way we're taught to read, we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner, and we're going to move our way down the visualization. I'm pretty confident that you probably first read the title, just how we're trained, right? Then you possibly looked at the subtitle, or you may have gone right down to the horizontal axis and seeing, okay, I've got this category of all, and then we're talking about less than high school, some college. So we have the different categories, right? So I can tell, yes, we are looking by education. Now I might go back up and say, okay, I want more information. Well, we're looking at per 1,000. Okay, so these numbers are per 1,000. But then my eyes have to scan to the legend and have to tell the difference between these colors, which is somewhat monochromatic, and decide which year is which. Well, at least it goes in order, right? 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So, okay, I can go from there. But again, I've taken all this time just to try to take the graph and understand the graph, rather than to try to get the information to make any type of decision from it. So right now I'm just trying to understand what the graph is about. Where you can take that, what this would be as a clustered bar chart, you can take that clustered bar chart and a type of visualization that people often don't think about when making comparisons across different categories of data is what's called a slope graph. So this slope graph that you see on the right, now if you look, the title very similar, right? New marriage rate by education, the same thing, the subtitle the same. But now what we've done is we've transposed the axes, right? So what was our horizontal axes for our categories is now actually our vertical axis. It's our lines. The lines represent each category. And what was the legend for each of the years has become our horizontal axis. So because now we're doing data over time is best presented as a line graph because it's continuous data over time, and we can look at the slope now. So if you just take a peek at the two visualizations, what I'm hoping you see is very quickly the one on the right, you can see, oh, but geez, for sure, when there's a bachelor's degree or more, there's a greater prevalence of marriage rates by education than, let's say, less than high school or high school grad. There's that gap, right? That gap between the bachelor's degree and some college. And then I could also say that, in fact, it appears that there was a dip and then an increase again between 2011 and 2012. So I can quickly come up with some of these decisions where, honestly, it would have taken me longer. I could have come up with these same conclusions on the left, because it's the same data, but it just would have taken me longer to get there. And another point to be made, and like I say, in the longer version of the training, we would talk about colors. So another point to be made here is you use color to your advantage. Notice that on the left, there's a lot of different colors. It's somewhat monochromatic in that, I guess, range of brown and orange colors, those fall looking colors. But then on the right, really, we just have that orange color, that orangish color, which is popping out at us. It's eye catching, which you want it to be if that's the story you want to tell, that you want to speak on the bachelor's degree or more. And then everything else is grayed out and put in the background. I still see it, I can still compare to it, but I have a focal point, and we'll talk more about that as we move through the presentation. So what you want to do, the key here is you want to highlight the important points. Depending on what your important points are, you have to know, and you want to eliminate your distractions. And that's what you see here, highlighting the important point of the bachelor's degree or more, and eliminating the distractions or moving them into the background of the other categories. So the question becomes, when you look at something like that and you say, okay, well, I know that in my company, we're used to doing visualizations that, are somewhat cluttered, and that's a term that gets thrown out a lot in data visualization, is the cluttered and that data to ink ratio. And you may think, okay, well, we're kind of used to having these visualizations or pie charts, which we'll talk more about a little bit, but that just maybe don't get to our story of the data, that maybe they don't really capture, and it takes us longer to come up with business decisions. So how do I know if I have a quote unquote good visualization? Well, the idea is, honestly, people skilled in data visualization are hard to come by. It's something that, as you all know, now data visualization has been around for centuries, right? I mean, there were drawings in the caves back in prehistoric times. There's been data visualization forever. Data visualization is not new. Please don't think it's new. What's new are these tools, right? So we have all these tools, these online tools, such as Tableau, such as there's Power BI, which is part of the Excel series. So there's all these different types of tools that we can use that can help us with our data visualization, but not very many people are trained in them. And there hasn't been a lot of training even in higher ed up until recently in these different areas. And honestly, the people that are hired in your analytical roles, they're quant people, and they're quant people, and they can pull together data, they can analyze data, they can clean data, but they typically are not communicating the data. See, because when you communicate the data, that's when you can make your business decisions. And that's what we need. We need our managers to be able to communicate the data. We need our supervisors. We need everybody in our operations to be able to communicate the data and tell a story about the data. Otherwise, what's the purpose of even spending the time to pull the data together and to create the visualization? Well, the idea is, well, people will think, all right, well, you're skilled in Microsoft Office, well, so is everyone else. So there are a lot of people that say, well, I'm skilled in Office. I'm an Excel user, right? I know how to use Excel. Well, so does everyone else. That doesn't mean that you have advanced Excel skills. You might think you do, but the question is, do you really? And do you know how to tell a story with your data? So there's a difference, because being able to effectively tell your stories gives you an edge and a position that most people don't have. Most people don't know how to communicate the data. So there is a story in your data, but guys, your tools don't know what the story is. You have to bring the story to life. So quick example, because I poked a little bit at the pie chart, and I'm going to continue to poke at the pie chart a little bit. Now, what I want you to do is, I know in a lot of industry, a lot of places use pie charts. The problem with a pie chart, now pie charts aren't always terrible, but if you go to, and this is not Dianna Cichocki only saying it, if you go to Stephen Few or Edward Tufte or Cole Knaflick, all of them will agree that you should avoid a pie chart. The main reason behind avoiding a pie chart is realistically, our brains do not detect differences in angles as well as we do differences in areas. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But the idea, if you go back to what may have been your sophomore year in high school, depending on where you went to high school, you likely took a geometry course that you may not have enjoyed. Now, my background is mathematics, so of course I enjoyed that course. I liked that. But not everybody does, right? Angles are not everybody's thing. And the difference between 39% and 43% is very slight, is another problem. And when you look at a pie chart, often people use a pie chart just because it's an easy click in Microsoft Excel, for example, but is it the best way to show your data? So you have a pie chart in front of you here, you could start to tell a story about it, but honestly, so much easier, so much quicker to get to your story would be to just use a bar chart or even a dot plot. But you use a bar chart and you can quickly see the larger percentages and the smaller percentages. You don't even have to go through the different angles and look at all the different colors. It's just a quicker visualization and easier to read, more efficient. Now, another example of that, and I spoke to the difference between angles and areas, is this visualization here, where before you have a bar chart, so you could take a moment as I'm speaking and look at this and you could see, okay, you probably quickly get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, well, the majority of people, you've got, 44%, you might say that's the majority, but really it's not, right? It's not over 50%, it's 44%, but it might be given that the majority of people are not interested at all. Well, that's not true, not at all interested. But when you combine that 44% not at all interested with those who are minimally interested, which by the way, the colors don't jive, but you have that peach color of 15%, now all of a sudden you're in the majority, right? But then you've got the blue for not at all interested, the darker blue with the lighter blue that's extremely interested. This could be kind of confusing if you're looking at it quickly. It takes a while to process the information. Whereas if you simply look at areas, and that's where you see the rectangles here, and you look at these, and now look how the colors have changed too. So there was a miscommunication of the data, in my opinion, or misleading with the colors up top. But when you change the color spectrum to show those that are minimally and not at all interested in one color hue, and those that are extremely and moderately interested in another color hue, and now you can quickly see with areas that the majority are really minimally or not at all interested. And we have approximately, you have over a third there, right, at 22%, and another almost 20%. So you have over 40% of people that are extremely or moderately interested. But you can quickly get to that, versus it took me a little longer to get to that with the pie chart. So just another example of a type of chart that can be produced in Excel, just as easily actually, to communicate your data effectively. Okay. So now this gets to my favorite part of the presentation. And typically for my audience, this is one of their favorite parts of the presentation as well, because it's great. Like I can show you these things. I can show you befores and afters and be like, oh, well, look at this before and look at this after. And you think, Dianna, that's fantastic. But I would have never thought of the slope chart for the marriage rates by education. I haven't seen them enough. I wouldn't have thought of it. Now I'll think of it. But even with the pie chart, my company is so used to using pie charts, I just wouldn't have ever thought to do a horizontal bar chart and split it up by sections. So what happens is one of the best ways to improve at visualizations is actually to see a visualization transform, to critique one, and then see it transform from beginning to end. So if we were in person, what we would do is we would go through and we would start to critique this visualization that you see before you. We would go over, what do different people think could be made better? What seems confusing? What would you maybe change? But here in this presentation, I'm just going to walk you through some of those ideas. So the idea here is that there is overlabeling. And overlabeling is a major problem in visualizations and organizations. You only want to label if you need it to tell the story. There's nothing wrong with text boxes, there's nothing wrong with labeling, but you only want to label if it's actually needed to tell the story. So what you're going to do here is you're going to say, all right, sorry, I slipped through one of my slides, but you've got the purple box, you know, it's good, but do we need that purple box? So look over, you see this purple box. Should it be a bar chart, date over time? It's cluttered. There's no active title. We'll talk about active titles. That x-axis, don't make people tilt their head and have to go to their chiropractor because they're looking at your visualizations. You don't want the x-axis to be slanted. You want to make sure you don't have redundancy in dates. The y-axis of a bar chart, this is really important, that the y-axis should always start at 0. The y-axis of a line chart, mind you, does not need to start at 0 because the white space doesn't matter. But in a bar chart, what that does is it truncates the data, we call it, and makes a big difference. So if it is a bar chart, you should always start at 0. No need for 2 decimal places. You notice how it's 1.00, 1.10, 1.20, etc. What's the deal with the zeros? What's the need for those? There's no informative value there. And then what you want to do is you want to take this and you want it to be a sensible display. You want to afford the design, and you want to have a clear so what, and that gets to the active title end of this. Let's take a peek. Walk through each one of them. 0 axis for bar chart. Okay, well, we had this bar chart, remember? There it is. Let's change it to a 0 axis. So now, see the difference? I'm going back and forth because we've truncated our data when we start at 1, but when I start at 0, all of a sudden, and you see this honestly in the news media quite a bit, where they'll truncate the data and in all levels of the media, and it does make a difference. It misinforms and misleads. Now, if you want to mislead, go ahead. I'll have people say that in my classes, well, they'll be maybe in marketing and they'll be, well, what if we want to mislead? Oh, well, use a pie chart and truncate your data. But I don't recommend you do that. You use your 0 axis for bar charts. Sensibility and design, let's convert this to a line chart. We're going to convert it to a line chart because it's data over time and we're looking for a trend. So we're looking at a trend. We don't really need to see the length of each of these bars. We're looking at a trend, so let's convert it to a line chart. Now we've made it a line chart. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take away the boxes and the shadowing. So keep watching as I speak at the visualization on the right. So I'm going to take away the boxes. They're gone. All the boxes are gone. The shadowing's gone. We're going to take away the target line because what is that green line anyway? Well, it's the target line. All right, well, let's take it away for a moment and we're going to remove the data labels and the markers. So let's watch all that happen. We're going to take away the target line. We're going to remove the data labels and the markers. It's looking better already. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the graph border and the grid lines. So now people don't always like me when I say this because everybody likes their grid lines, but watch the difference. When we go ahead and remove the border and the grid lines, I'm just going to toggle back for a moment just to prove to you what's a cleaner look. We have this look, and of course you'd have your visualization on one slide, right? As a large visualization on your slide. But here, if I've got these grid lines and I have the border around it, it's just more ink. It's more to draw our eyes away from. When I remove them, it's just a much cleaner look. So I have this much cleaner look because I've removed the graph border and the grid lines. I'm going to drop the trailing zeros, which allows us to make our numbers bigger. Remember that 0.00, 0.20, 0.40. We're going to drop the trailing zeros. We're going to align the y-axis. So we're going to take that tilt away. No offense to chiropractors, so they don't have to then adjust our neck. And then we're going to pull out the years, so the super categories, and left align the axis titles. We're going to do all of that. So let's take a peek. So I just got rid of the trailing zeros that were occurring on our vertical axis. Now I went ahead and in one swoop, look what I did. I pulled out the super category of the years on the horizontal axis. I have my months along the horizontal axis. My labeling is on the left. It's nice, clean labeling, and the axis label of the ads in the first month along the side. But now what I haven't done yet is I haven't left aligned the title, and that's subjective, whether you want the title in the center or the title in the left. Personally, for me, I prefer the title to the left just because I think it's a clean look. That's subjective. Data visualization, there's a form of artwork here. So if you like the title better in the center, that's fine. But the idea is you should have an active title. So we're going to add that, which we'll talk about in a moment. We're going to add that target line back in. But when we add the target line back in, we don't make it this bright green color. It's in the background, it's faded, and then we have our legend at the bottom for our target line in our initial ads. But so the audience doesn't have to move from the top of the visualization to the bottom and then back up to the graph again. We're going to label that directly. That's just adding a text box. You literally, if you're working in Excel, you just insert text box and type in the word target and type in the word ads. So now we've labeled these directly, and we have a much cleaner look to our visualization than what we had in the beginning. And as I said, I told you we'd come back to this active title. So this is a nice looking graph, but there's the big key takeaway of so what? So what? What does this tell me? You have to give it, be like giving your audience a book and calling it book, or calling it, you know, novel. You want to have a title that's going to give some information, right? So what? Annotate to tell the audience what they're supposed to look at and what they're meant to see. Maybe it's things are roughly flat. Now notice the intentional data markers here. So from the beginning to the end, initial client additions are roughly flat. Or maybe we want to go to the next slide and say, well, another thing we've discovered is that we're highest in July 2018. Notice the colors. Or maybe this is all the same visualization, lots of stories to tell. Maybe we're above the target 3 times in the past 16 months. One more, maybe we're below the target most of the time. Do we want to go with that positive spin? Do we want to lead with that? Or do we want to lead with the, well, we're below the target most of the time, but hey guys, you know, we're above the target 3 times in the past 16 months. I mean, that depends on your organization and what works best, right? But you can see that from the same visualization, we can tell a story, and we're not leaving the reader to come up with their own conclusions. We can lead the reader as to where we want to go with it. So if we want to talk about being below the target most of the time, we can present this visualization and we can talk about how that can change. And then you could always also add text to explain, like, why is this happening? Well, we're below target in recent months, but I just took a piece, if you see, of the line graph and built it with the same color, because the color hue brings your eyes to that attention. And you can say, well, what's led to that recent negative trend? Don't be afraid of adding text boxes with information in your visualization so that, again, your reader doesn't have to assume and make assumptions as to why this is happening. You have people analyzing your data and giving you the reasons for things. Use that to your advantage and actually put those in your visualizations. So the idea is you want to tell a story with data. Take a peek at the very first visualization we had compared to and possibly you're coming up with the fact that the ticket volume decreases compared to the ticket volume processed, what's processed decreases compared to what's been received in June. So after May, you see this change in the difference between the blue and the red. And some of you may not even gotten there yet, and that's okay, because this is a terrible visualization. So if you didn't get there right away, which, by the way, when you look at a visualization, you should be able to get the story within 15 to 30 seconds max. So if you didn't get there, I didn't expect you to, but let's redo this. So the objective, so again, you want to know, I talked a little bit about who your audience is, and that would be part of the larger presentation, but who your audience is, and you also want to know what is your objective, what is your goal? Well, we know that the goal with this data is we want to show the need for an additional FTE due to decreased ticket processing. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show my company the need for another full-time employee because we're falling behind in our ticket processing. The question is, does this graph quickly give that information, or does it do it in the best way, right? So let's see what we can do with that. Data over time, let's make it align. Kind of rhymes, right? Data over time, we're gonna make it align. So we took the same data and I've made it a line chart. Now I have a line chart, date over time. There's that crooked horizontal axis again. There's all those extra zeros again. So you have some issues. We're going to work on them, right? We're going to remove the border and the grid lines. Again, people fight me on this, but look at this, focus, and then I'm going to flip to the next slide. I remove the border, right? Remove the border. Now here go those grid lines that everybody thinks you need. But remember, you're only looking at trends. Much cleaner. I only am looking at the trend. Much cleaner. I've removed the grid lines. Now I remove the markers and I'm going to clean those axes up. So you're going to see the markers go away. So the diamonds and the squares go away, along with you're going to see the horizontal axis not be slanted, and we're going to remove those unnecessary zeros on the vertical axis. So there go the markers, and we've cleaned up our axes. Looking so much better. And I've been able to now expand my graph to use more of the PowerPoint slide, right? So my focus is my visualization. Okay, we're going to keep going, and we're going to label directly. So I'm going to take that legend from the bottom, and I'm going to remove it so my eyes don't have to go from the title down to the legend, back up to the graph, and I'm just going to label directly, but I'm going to go even a step further and leverage color. So I'm going to label directly. I'm going to leverage color so that my colors for received and processed match for the text. And again, that's just insert text box, very easy to do in Microsoft Excel. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, well, even if you stopped here, guys, even if you stopped here, you have a much better visualization than what we started with the line. Now, remember, the first one was terrible with the bar chart. But even when we stopped here, we've got a better visualization. We can see that there's a gap between what was received and what was processed. Looks like it started, after May, right? But what if we went on? What if we made the data stand out? Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to convince or sell the fact that we need an additional FTE. So what if we take that received and kind of put it in the background a little bit, but really pop out what the number that have been processed, how many orders have been processed. And then we add the data markers, but we're going to do it purposefully. We're not going to add all the data markers. We're only going to add the ones after, when we start to lag behind with what's processed versus what's received. Now, this is the idea where you see some organizations will at the very bottom put a table underneath. There's really no need for the table. Very often, especially if you're doing bar charts and line charts, you don't need all the data. There's no need for it. You're looking at the chart to summarize the data. If you want the data, show a table with the data, but don't show a chart with a table. There's no need for that. Maybe show a chart with some of the data on it if you need it to tell your story. So now, what's the big so what? Let's go beyond a title, and let's actually tell a story. So ticket volume over time. So what? We've got the number of tickets, we have our months, we have our year, we have how many are received and how many are processed, and take a peek at this. We've added this active title. Let's please approve to hire 2 FTEs. Actually, let's hire 2 FTEs. And why? Because we want to backfill those who quit in the past year. So that's where our eyes are going to go, right to that title. We do still keep it that this is ticket volume over time, but now we've explained that you see 2 employees quit in May, and we nearly kept up with the incoming volume, but we fell behind. And you know what, ever since August, we haven't been able to catch up since. So we really could use 2 additional FTEs. And what this does is this visualization here would able then to be emailed out. You're not leaving any imagination to this, to the reader. They have all of your explanations in one visualization, so a decision can be made. So the idea would be, obviously, which is more convincing? If you send the graph on the left and you say, you know what, we need to hire additional FTEs, or if you send the graph on the right and say we need to hire additional FTEs, keeping in mind that this all comes from your data, right? That's already been compiled, and then you've put into the form of a visualization to tell a story. So the idea here is, all right, this is great. We can tell stories with data, but what are the typical ways that people visualize data? Well, tends to be line charts, tends to be bar charts, and tends to be pie charts. So we talked about the pie chart a little bit. You've seen the line chart now as a conversion from the bar chart, right? Bar charts aren't bad. Bar charts are very valid ways to visualize data. But what about this graph? This is actually called a spaghetti graph. You often will see something like this. We have all these lines, but how could we use something that we already know that the company is used to seeing? So our organization is used to seeing these line charts. We don't want to change everything overnight, but how could we leverage the line chart to our benefit without making drastic changes? Well, watch this. What if we just emphasize one line at a time? What if we're looking at types of nonprofits supported by area fundraisers over time, and we just want to talk about the health nonprofits? So we just want to talk about that one at a time. So now we could have a conversation about that one area, or we could talk about education, and we could have a discussion on education. We could then have a discussion on all of them relative to one another if we look at their slopes. There's that slope graph again. So in the first couple slides, we're looking at one compared to all of the others, right? Very single story, health and then education. Where in this next slide, we could look at a comprehensive view of all of the different areas and have a discussion. But maybe even better yet, maybe we still want to be able to compare one to the rest, and so we can put them in the background. And we can still have a better discussion than we could have in the original spaghetti graph. This is just a mess. First of all, it's gonna take me too long to just come up with which line goes to which area, right? So going through, you can do just one line at a time, call it out. Or you can look at all of them in comparison. So we can look at a comprehensive view, or we look at them in comparison to one another. Now back to those pie charts. Unless you're serving dessert, you want to dump the pie. So the idea with the pie chart, I just want to show you, I really want to hit home because this is a tough one for people. They love their pie charts. These are survey results of a summer learning program on science and pre the summer learning. So before the summer learning program, how students felt about, and these are elementary school students, how they felt about science. So we have the results from the survey before the summer learning program, and then we have the results of the survey after. So see, right away I had to explain all that information to you, and then now you're going to have to go down to the pie chart and you're going to have to try to figure out what happened in each category. You'll do it, you'll all be able to do it, and it works, but there are better ways. Just like you can write a paper and you can write a paper that earns a C, or you can write a paper that earns an A, right? There's always better ways. What about this? What about text only? The pilot program was a success because after the pilot program, 68% of kids expressed interest towards science compared to 44% going into the program. And that's what we see here. So we look at those that are interested, kind of interested or excited or okay, and we're adding these up, and we come up with the fact that, okay, after the pilot program, it was 60% compared to 44%. That's the idea of our 1.7 billion servings of Coke. Same idea, right? Just use simple text. Nothing wrong with that. You don't need a pie chart to tell a 1-point story. Or what about that stacked horizontal bar graph that I talked about? So how do you feel about science? And look at the leveraging the colors, even the colors with the text. So we've got those that are, in the middle, those that are okay in the orange, and we can talk about that underneath with text that matches in orange. So our eye is drawn in the same area to read all about the versions of those that felt okay. And then in the blue, those were kind of interested or excited. And then in the background, those who are bored or not great. But of course, you can work with your own company as to, what are your target colors that you'd want to use here for branding as well. Again, there's that slope graph. Now, this might not be the best for you in this situation, but you can quickly see that before to after, there's a drastic decrease in those who felt just okay about the program. And notice the text. So the text says before the program, the majority of children felt just okay about science. But then after the program, more children, so we have this increase in slope, right, a positive slope, more children were kind of interested and actually excited about science. So that text is really helpful in something that at first you might look at. So it's going to take me a little bit to figure out, but then you've got the text to clarify what you're looking at. And then the last alternative is our simple bar graph. Now remember, I'm not adverse to simple bar graphs. Just use purposeful color and text, especially if this is going to be sent out, let's say in an email or in a publication, newspaper article, anything like that. You want to really make sure that you're giving your reader all of the information versus a presentation. If this were a presentation mode, I would go through parts of this. I'd lead you through the story instead of having everything all on at once. All right, well, what that is going to bring us to, and I told you I'd keep you to about 45 minutes, so I'm there, so I'm almost done, is that when you build storytelling with data in your organization, there's different ways to make this happen. This doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time. So one idea would be to have, like a makeover Monday. We're going to challenge individuals to a weekly makeover of less than ideal examples, and be okay with critiquing and making things better. You have to have a team that you can communicate and trust with, right? And just come up with, okay, we have this visualization. What are some ways we could do this better? We're going to have a makeover Monday, or we're going to do a feedback loop. We're going to set the expectation that individuals must share their work in progress and offer feedback. This goes back to the idea, guys, when you wrote papers in your in higher ed, let's say, or even in high school, you'd submit a draft version, right? You wouldn't just write a 10-page paper in high school and just turn in that 10-page paper. No, when you were learning back in high school and you're learning to write those longer papers for projects, you turned them in sections. You maybe just turned in an outline, and then you just turned in your first draft of maybe just your first few paragraphs, and then you turned in a second draft, and sometimes a third and fourth. But you definitely had feedback. And that's how we learn, right? You learn from feedback. So the same type of thing, set the expectation that the people that are creating your visualizations are going to get feedback from others. You create the visualizations, you want to just do this on your own, you want to try to get better, take people in your life, take family members that don't know anything about your organization. That's okay. They should still be able to tell the story of your data within 15 to 30 seconds. Even if they don't know anything about your organization, they should be able to get to your objective of your visualization. And then, of course, there's always that competitive nature of people, right? So you have a contest where individuals or teams can submit their own examples, and then you can improve your storytelling over time. So just some ways that you can kind of pique some interest in this in your organization. Now, to sum this up before I go to questions, what I would do is I'm going to backtrack a bit to say that before you get to this point, right? So before we can get to the point where we're going to make our visualizations, we have to be able to use our tools to actually compile our data and analyze our data. Typically, especially in the day we have now of all this large amounts of data, what you're going to need is you're going to need to be able to take that data and you're going to need to summarize it. You're going to want to clean your data. You're going to want to make pivot tables with your data. You're going to want to optimize all these different things you can do. And very often the Excel will do all of that for you. There are so many things in Excel that even the person that thinks they're an intermediate or advanced user of Excel just doesn't even know exists. So I do offer a couple courses through UB's CED. So you can contact the Office of Executive and Professional Development. And there's one as an introduction to data modeling using Excel. It's a self-paced 10-week online program. It's going to start again. It's running right now, but we'll start up again October 5th. And there's another, the second course is data modeling and dashboards using Excel Power Tools. Now, if you've never heard of Excel Power Tools, what I'm talking about there is Power Query and Power Pivot and actually even Power Map and Power View, free. It's free. So it's right in Excel already. Some awesome ways to combine data and to merge files together and to produce dashboards that people don't even know is in all of your versions of Excel. So you use your Excel and you're really only using a portion, kind of like they say with our brains, right? We only use a portion of our brains. Well, most people only use a portion of what Excel can do. So if you're interested in either of those, here is the information for who you can contact. There is the email and the phone number if you happen to be interested in either of those sessions. So now, Christy, I'm at the point where if there are any questions, I am very open to answering those, and I'll pop myself back on here.
Excellent. Just a question that has come through real quickly here. Do you have any courses with Power BI?
Currently, I don't personally offer any courses with Power BI, but what I would tell you is that so Power BI is the business intelligence version of exactly what happens in Microsoft Excel's version of Power Query and Power Pivot. There's differences. Power BI has a cost to it where Power Query and Power Pivot are free within Excel, like once you buy Excel. So the two are very similar. What I would say to you is you can do the majority of what you likely would do in Power BI, you can do in Power Query and Power Pivot. It just depends on what you want to do. So we have the course that I mentioned on the last slide, I'll actually put that back here. The second one here, that second one does go into the Power Query and the Power Pivot. which is the same as what Power BI does. And actually in Power View, similar to Power BI. However, I will say, I'm going to admit that Power BI has some more advanced ways to slice data as far as the dashboards go. But once you learn Power Query and Power Pivot, it's easily transferable to Power BI.
Excellent. Diana, it looks like that might be the only question thus far that has come through. A lot of comments coming through thanking you. Well, you do have another question, actually, that just popped up. So let me go ahead and get to that first. Any ideas for visualizing comparative staffing and spending between entities?
Sure. So you want to, so let me repeat that. Christine, you can make sure I said it right. So you want to compare staffing and spending, as you said, they said between entities, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, well, one of the ways you can do that is you can use, if you're doing it as spending and staffing together, I don't know if you need them together, you might want those to be two separate visualizations, but I'm not sure. But one way you could do that if you wanted to keep it together, that's that cluster bar idea where you have the two bars together. And then I'm assuming you mean of different entities as the separate categories. See, this is hard because I don't know exactly what your data is. So that's one way you could do that. There's other ways that you could do. You could use the whole idea of the slope charts, the line charts. Really, when it comes to giving ideas about what type of visualization you should use for something, I'm going to tell you that most often you're going to use simple text. You're going to use bar charts. You're going to use line charts. Sometimes scatter plots are great ways to visualize data. But that's really it. I mean, you can get into Tableau, has their area charts and all these fancy donut graphs and all these fancy things that you don't need. You're just keep it basic and keep it simple. The mistake I see a lot of people do with their visualizations is they try to put too much information into one visual. So feel free to separate your information into multiple visuals, and that might help.
Fantastic. You have some more questions coming in, Diana, so we'll get to those real quickly here. Real quickly, though, back to the slide that you're currently on with the courses. The next question, are the syllabi for the two listed courses available on the School of Management website?
Yes, and I'm off the top of my head, maybe Christy, we can get this back to everybody. I don't know how you want to do that, but at the top of my head, I cannot recall exactly what website. So if you go to the website where you register for these courses, you know what, you can just email mgt-ced@buffalo.edu if you're interested. But if you Google it, if you Google Introduction to Data Modeling or Data Modeling and Dashboard using Power Tools and Google UB School of Management, the site will come up. And I just can't think of the actual URL right now. And yes, and then all of the topics. So for example, in the Introduction to Data Modeling, I go through, you know, the beginner methods in Excel all the way down to advanced. So I'm talking about Scenario Manager. We go into some data tables. We talk about different tips and tricks in Excel, shortcuts that people just don't know about. We go into pivot tables, and all of the topics that are covered are listed, as well as in the data modeling and dashboards. The different topics that are covered in those, both of those training sessions are listed.
Fantastic. And Diana, the next question we have here, when is a scatter plot good to use?
So a scatter plot would be good to use when you're trying to compare, so think, and sound, I teach statistics, remember. So think regression, you know, when you're looking to predict or compare two different variables. So when you have your X and your Y, and you're looking, think of scatter plot like, for those, if you're not a statistics type of person, when you're doing your plotting in 9th grade algebra class, when you plot your XY graph, right? So the scatter plot would be useful when you have two different categories that you're plotting a value for. That's when your scatter plot is useful. And then a bubble chart goes beyond that. And the bubble chart actually takes, and you've seen these likely before, where you have a scatter plot, but then the size of the dots are different, right? You'll have a smaller dot, and we call them bubbles, or a bigger dot. And that's where now you have that XYZ axis, where you have that third variable that comes into play that's going to expand. Honestly, right now they're showing it in maps with coronavirus. Actually, honestly, you guys see it all the time with COVID right now. We see the circles, and we're talking about the, however big the circle is that changes depending on the area. So that's the idea I mean when I'm talking about the bubbles. But yes, when you're comparing multiple variables, that's when you're going to use the scatter plot.
Excellent. Diana, the next question here, a question comment. The first graph we analyzed about marriage, were both parties college educated, high school only, no high school, etc.? This would matter, and what would be the goal of that?
Yeah, well, that first graph, honestly, the fact that we don't know the answer to that could be one of the faults of the graph, right? So it depends. I guess my question back to you would be, do we need to know that? If they both were, or if they're both not. I mean, if that's something that needed to be known, if that was important for the data, then that should be stated. Honestly, that first one, the purpose of that first graph was really not to tell you anything truly about marriage rates as much as to show you an example of where you would take clustered bars and turn them into a slope and be able to see the difference in rates much better than with the original visualization. But to be honest, I don't know whether both parties were and if it mattered or not. I mean, if you're just looking at one individual in each case, then I guess maybe we'd look at the person with the higher level of education. But really that's not the point of that. The point of that was to show you two different visualizations. But good point is that if that's something that you're interested in, you definitely would want to you'd want to build that into your visualization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Diana. I think those are the final questions we have today, and I know we're approaching the top of the hour, so I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management. We're very thankful for your time. I know you're busy these days. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. Just as a reminder for everyone, the webinar has been recorded, and we'll send you all the link within the next 24 hours. And we'll also include this information in tomorrow's follow-up email that you'll receive with the link to the recording. Lastly, please save the date for next Wednesday, July 29th. We'll continue our webinar series. We're going to be joined by a professor this time from the the College of Arts and Sciences, a UB alumnus and clinical assistant professor of biological sciences, David Hoekstra. David runs the UBB's Research and Outreach Initiative and is going to discuss the basics of beekeeping and or supporting the bees by planting pollinator-friendly plants at your houses. So learn about all the differences between a yellow jacket, honeybee, carpenter bee, bumblebee, and other kinds of bees as you join us next Wednesday, like I said, with Clinical Assistant Professor of Biological Sciences, David Hoekstra. With that said, I want to go ahead and turn it back to Diana for any closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you very much, Christy. I just want to thank everyone for joining me today, joining us this afternoon, and those of you who are joining us later in the recording. I hope that this session just makes you think a little bit deeper about your visualizations. And honestly, the objective and the goal for me is to just start to elicit change in organizations, to just start to make you think a little differently. How could we improve, and to help everyone communicate more effectively with your data. So you have wonderful afternoons. I hope everyone stays healthy and well, and thank you very much for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you, Diana. We'll also go ahead and get the link out to everyone as well in the email tomorrow if you're interested in the syllabi or to learn more about the classes Diana mentioned. Again, thank you all. You can find this recording again on our website. We have an archive library there, and you can view all of our upcoming webinars. Thank you again. Take care, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your day.